Hi, my name is Alex Dolphin, and welcome back to another episode of Ex Ante. Today we're going to discuss the case State v. Forrest. This case was heard in the North Carolina Supreme Court in the year 1987. Let's go ahead and jump into the facts of the case. So the defendant, Forrest, was being prosecuted by the state for murder in the first degree. What did the defendant do to deserve this charge? Well, the defendant was visiting his father at a hospital. His father was incredibly ill, basically on his deathbed is what the opinion writes. Very sick man. While the Miss Forrest goes and visits his father, he basically tells the nurse to exit the room. He talks about how it's time for his dad to be put out of his suffering, that his dad suffered too long, and that it's time for this to all be over. So the nurse leaves after a bit of a scuffle, and he is in the room by himself with his father. Now, while he's there, he takes out his gun and he shoots his dad multiple times in the head. So his dad dies. Essentially, he feels like he put his father out of his misery. The state doesn't feel that way. The state feels like this is murder in the first degree. Now, murder in the first degree is defined by North Carolina state statute as the intentional and unlawful killing of a human being with malice and with premeditation and deliberation. So the mens rea of first-degree murder is premeditation, deliberation, malice, and intent, right? There's a lot there that you have to prove to the mental state of the defendant. So the state has a high bar of evidence to prove murder in the first degree. Now, the jury felt like the state did a good enough job proving that it was murder in the first degree. A few facts that the jury and the court below, the trial court, felt were convincing was that he had a gun with him in the hospital. Now, the defendant said he carried his gun whenever he was driving his truck. Well, the defendant wasn't driving his truck that day, right? He came into the hospital with a gun. Another thing they find persuasive is his statements that he made before the nurse exited the room about how it was time for his dad to be put out of his misery, essentially. So they find those statements persuasive as to evidence that this was a premeditated and deliberative killing of another person. Now, Forrest is challenging on appeal to the Supreme Court that the trial court basically erred in holding and submitting the evidence to the jury that there was premeditation and deliberation in this murder. So basically he's just countering the mens rea of the crime. He's saying he didn't have the premeditation, he didn't have the deliberation. This was kind of a heat of the moment thing, and for that reason he shouldn't be prosecuted of murder in the first degree, right? So there's a kind of a divide in the law of whether you have to have, like a long-term premeditation or if it's a heat of the moment thing. And a lot of times the heat of the moment murders aren't considered murder in the first degree. Murder in the first degree is something that's more deliberative, more planned out. Now, the appellate court doesn't find the argument of Forrest persuasive. They say, it's pretty obvious that this was a premeditated thing. And they turn again to the fact that he talked to the nurse about it's time for his dad to be put out of his misery, and the fact that he brought a gun in, and the fact that he shot him multiple times in the head. So, although this case might seem like, well, the son was trying to do a good thing for his suffering father who's coughing on his deathbed, the state does not see it that way, and the state convicts him of murder in the first degree. Now, this is an interesting case because it shows that the law isn't always intuitive. Sometimes people get off for much more egregious things than this. It feels like Forrest was, in his heart of hearts, trying to do a good thing. He was trying to get his father out of the suffering. But the law is very firm in treating people that have a premeditated intent to kill someone and convict them with first-degree murder, because that is essentially, Forrest really fits the definition of first-degree murder well. The circumstances that his father was sick, it seems like that's not first-degree murder. What is that? What are we going to call that? Well, there has to be some consistency in how the statutes are applied. So I'd like to just, maybe pose a bit of a hypothetical. Let's imagine that Forrest didn't come in to the hospital with a gun. He did ask the nurse to exit, and he essentially pulled the plug on his father's ventilator. Let's say his father was being kept alive by a ventilator. He pulled the plug while the nurse was out. Well, do we think that that is enough to convict him of murder in the first degree? And I think that is an interesting question. It's an interesting question to think about. If he doesn't have the gun and is shooting him, but rather just pulls the plug, is that murder in the first degree? Is he certain? Does he intend actually to kill his father just by pulling the plug? Does he know for certainty that he's going to pull the plug? Maybe the intent level of mens rea would be more difficult to prove if he would have just pulled the plug and then rather than he would have shot him. Now let's also consider a scenario where maybe he doesn't say anything to the nurse about the father needing to be out of his misery. He just quietly walks in, says, "Hey nurse, I need to have some alone time with his dad," and then pulls the plug. Then do we not have as much of the mens rea necessary to prove first degree murder? And I think that's almost certain that we wouldn't, because he doesn't have the gun that he's carrying in with him at that point. He doesn't say anything to the nurse about it's time to put his father out of his misery. So what this really shows us is that the mens rea has to be inferred by the circumstances around the defendant and the actions of the defendant. And it seems pretty clear here that he intended to kill his father. Now, were his intentions good? Likely so. He meant to put his father out of his misery, but he certainly intended to kill his father, and that's what the law focuses on, and that's what this case shows, and I think it's an interesting one. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye-bye.